The Dialed In Angling Podcast, brought to you by Strike Master, Onyx Fish, and St. Croix Rods. Well, this week on the podcast, we are fishing on Mille Lake, capitalizing on these jumbo perch. You know, I do a lot of scouting when I'm not guiding. Currently, we're waiting for a couple of customers to come out, but I'm joined today by my good friend, Nick Cekalla. Nick, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
You know, talking to Nick the other day, I said, hey, I got a group on Thursday. Why don't you come out and join me? We can drill some holes, find some perch for them. Turns out they got sick. They got the flu like a lot of people are getting right now. It's kind of going around. But I do have some wheelhouse customers that are coming out. So I told Nick, let's just go fishing anyway. Let's go catch some perch. I know, Nick, it's been a couple weeks since you've been out here. So I know you were excited to get out here. I think the Mille Lacs perch story is probably the story of the ice season. You know, if you look across the ice belt, every year it seems like different bites emerge throughout the ice belt. You know, one year it'll be out in the Dakotas. You know, the next year it could be in Wisconsin or Iowa or whatever. But it's always something with ice fishing where a story really captivates, ice anglers. And I would definitely say the Mille Lacs perch have kind of have everyone's attention right now anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And for good reason. And I think for the most part that is so fun for me is everyone that comes up the hole is just a nice quality fish. I mean, you get a few smaller ones, but the average size perch out here is just pretty incredible. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of people have been coming out here and with social media, you see this a lot these days is everyone thinks that every time, you go out, you're going to pound them because no one's putting their pictures up out there when they have a tough day. There's a lot of work that goes into finding these fish, a lot of time on the water and, just being on the water and following those fish as they're moving. And that is one of the biggest reasons that I feel that people should hire a guide, because it's not we're the best fishermen in the world, but you're out here every single day following these fish, staying on these fish. And it's just so helpful. Nothing can replace time on the water.
On perch roam, some lakes, they're extremely shallow. You find perch that are in 4, 5, 6, 7 feet of water all winter long. And then you have perch out like the Mille Lacs that predominantly hang out in the basin this time of year anyway. And when they're in the basin, they're roaming and they're moving. And when we talk basin on Mille Lacs, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of, square miles, I would say, of basin. There's just miles and miles of endless basin out here, and these fish can just up and move. I've seen it where they'll move, almost a mile over a week time period. I mean, they're just feeding on bugs and moving on. I don't get an opportunity to come out and just enjoy myself perch fishing very often. As we get towards March here, I know we've only got a couple weeks left of the walleye season, but as soon as the walleye season closes down and these temps start to turn around a little bit, it's so fun to get out here and just drill holes and move around and find these fish. We've been kind of hunkered down here in the wheelhouse, but perch fishing to me is, being able to move around and get on top of those schools. It's pretty awesome to get on these schools and have them just fire up off the bottom. Like right now we're watching Nick's screen. Here we go. You got a couple coming up here. Catch them, Nick.
I'm trying.
But that's the fun part about perch fishing is the fact that they're so fiery. And right now all week long, it's been about 20 to 30 below in the mornings, yet you can still come out and catch perch. And that's the intrigue for perch fishing for a lot of ice anglers, is the fact that they bite even when the weather's bad. There we go. I hear a drag. We'll see how big this one is. Play-by-play as we're perch fishing on Mille Lacs, a little bit smaller perch. Oh, not bad.
No.
That's a bucket fish.
Absolutely.
So, as we get into late winter like this and we have this really kind of prolonged cold snap here in February, the perch are still biting, and that's what makes it fun. I will say one thing, whether you're fishing Mille Lacs or you're fishing anywhere else in Minnesota or even the Dakotas right now, I would say the hottest ticket item over the next few weeks, and mark my words on this, you're going to want to write this down or take a mental note of this, is an auger extension. This last cold snap, we are so close to needing auger extensions, especially if you have a wheelhouse, you need an auger extension. So if you're coming to Mille, if you're heading up north, keep track of the fact that you need to go buy an extension if you don't have one. And mark my words, they're going to be sold out quickly. Coming off of last year's ice season, where there was virtually no ice or very little ice, and to this year having to use extensions already in February. I mean, this cold snap looks like it's going to last at least another week. So putting the extension in your arsenal, if you will, or throw it in your truck or put it on your auger, especially if you have a wheelhouse. Mark my words, you need it if you have a wheelhouse. If you're fishing Mille, if you're fishing Winnie, if you're fishing Leech, if you're heading up to Red Lake, you need an extension. And as we get into next week, it looks like temps are still going to be extremely cold. So make sure you're putting the extensions in. Other noteworthy things as we get towards the closer of walleye, I want to talk about that a little bit. We got a couple weeks left of walleye fishing. There's a lot of people that just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and downsizing, and they get narrow bite windows. But I want anglers to not overlook shallow water bites. There's a lot of shallow water bites that happen in Minnesota. I know they happen to the Dakotas all year. You hear ice anglers in the Dakotas talk about fishing shallow all year. Okay. But in Minnesota, we tend to start sliding out to the basins and then we never leave. And then our walleye season closes. And so we never get an opportunity to kind of follow them back shallow again. But there's a shallow water bite going on right now in a lot of locations. And I think ice anglers in particular just kind of overlook that. They tend to go deep and stay deep and not go shallow. Like right now, we're chasing perch out deep. But if I was staying out here in my wheelhouse, I would probably set my wheelhouse shallow on some shallow rocks. And then I would just chase perch with portables, wouldn't you, Nick?
Yep. And I've been hearing that lately. Guys having really good success up in the rocks. I thought maybe it was a little early for that, but it's definitely that migration is going to start happening here any day of them fish coming back in.
Yeah, rocks, weeds. I don't know if it always happens or if it just we're finding them more now with forward-facing sonar, or we're just looking shallow. Because I was on a small lake kind of up by Winnie the other day, and I was looking for perch, and we couldn't find them deep. We just couldn't find any basin perch. As soon as I got shallow, we started finding perch. But guess what? We started seeing walleyes, and the walleyes were up there feeding as well. So it's sort of intriguing to me when you're fishing shallow, especially in clear water. You want to make sure first of all, that you're quiet this time of year, but second of all, kill the lights.
Yep.
I've talked about that a lot. On dialed in angling in general, whether you're winter camping or you're in a wheelhouse, it's easy to fire up the generator and have the pizza oven going and watching movies and having lights on. But if you're going to chase walleye shallow, you have got to be quiet.
And tip ups are, dead stick rods set out are a huge bonus in that shallow water, especially just because it's getting away from you, getting it out further away from the noise, the lights, whatever. But tip ups are setting, dead sticks is a huge thing to have in that shallow water. And it seems like, year round in that shallower water, the biggest walleyes are caught really.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they ever leave that shallower water, to be honest, but they always seem to come on that tip up, the furthest one away from you, because those fish are smart.
Yeah, I've seen them, now with forward-facing sonar, I've seen them kind of dodge the light of the shelter, right? Yep. And I didn't know if it was the signal from the forward-facing sonar or what, but as soon as we killed the lights, we started getting bites.
It's funny. I got a good buddy, Adam, up, and he does a lot of fishing after work, evening or into dark for crappies and stuff like that. And he fishes in one hole in his house, the very furthest forward, because he says he catches so many more fish in that hole, because as soon as they start coming closer to the house, they dodge around it. But that front hole, he gets a lot more bites, because on the backside, they're already getting away from the house and the lights and the noise and all that. But it's just something to really, start thinking about. How can I be quieter? How can I be more sneaky? And it's going to really help you catch more fish.
When I had Nick Linder on the podcast, he was talking about taking that foam that you put over your tip ups outside to kind of keep your hole from freezing. He just puts a slit in there and then a little teeny hole about 2 inches in diameter and jigs through that. And then that way he can, pull his line out or pull his fish through once he gets a bite. And I thought that was genius. He does that a lot for ice camping, but you could do that in your wheelhouse. You could do that in your hard house. I tend to turn off the LED lights that are above the holes, and I'll put all the hole covers on the holes that I'm not using, because most of my night fishing, I've ended up night fishing. It's because, I had customers out super long and I tend to fish out of that same house. So a lot of the holes might be drilled. So I just cover them all. And then I put one dead stick on the far end with no lights on. And then I'm jigging over another hole with no LED lights on. I think it makes a huge difference. And also, I think downsizing your minnows on your dead sticks, people still want to get those sucker minnows and those big shiners. I would rather have like a small shiner, fathead, or even a rainbow down. Okay. And I know it all depends on like where you're fishing as far as what the fish are keying in on. But I personally would really, tell people to downsize their dead sticks. Those great big minnows that kind of swim out and away from the fish, kind of out of their strike zone. I watch them come in and they don't hit it, right? They don't even kind of acknowledge it. But if there's a dead stick line that's kind of pinned to the bottom and you have a smaller minnow on there, it seems like the fish will just absolutely wreck that thing.
Yeah. And, talking about nighttime fishing, and we're moving on into February and March here. Another big fish is the eel pout, right? The eel pout spawn, they're going to start grouping up and becoming a really good fish to target this time of year. They're just an absolute riot to catch and great table fare. That's become really popular over the last few years. I've been hearing a lot more about the eel pout fishing.
Yeah, I love eel pout fishing. I absolutely, I love catching eel pout in the winter, and they really are turned on. This last full moon, it seemed like we're catching more at night. I've been out a few times. I know Pete, who guides with us, he's been out fishing at night and he's getting a lot more pout. What's interesting is we're seeing pout show up on Mille Lacs. It's been years since we've found good pout fishing on Mille Lacs, and now we're catching them pretty regularly, even during the day when we're perch fishing out in the basin. The other day, I think we caught 4 in one day. They were all kind of in that, I would say, 1.5 to 3 pound range. But that is great to see. I've always heard, the health of the fishery, is really dictated on the health of the pout population, the burbot population. And so if you have a healthy burbot population, that means you have a well-balanced fishery, So you see burbot in, Leech Lake, Winnie, Cass, Mille Lacs, all these big fisheries, Vermilion, all these big fisheries that we have in the state typically have healthy burbot populations, but it seems like it's been about a decade since we've seen really good numbers of burbot on Mille Lacs. And so it's great to see them back. The Dialed In Angling podcast is brought to you by St. Croix Rods, handcrafting the best rods on earth for an elevated angling experience since 1948. St. Croix Rods are truly a world-class brand that has earned the respect and admirations of anglers across the planet. I trust St. Croix Rods, and you should too. Check them out at stcroixrods.com.
So talking about, targeting burbot, when I've done it, I've always went to real sharp breaks. That's kind of the sharp breaks into deep water. Those are the areas I fished, kind of steeper lakes. And you said you were fishing in the basin. Where do you typically set up for pout?
Well, in the evenings, I like to get on those sharper breaks. During the day, they're cruising out in the steeper basin. But man, I mean, I've seen them where they just pop right up on top of the structure even, and they're cruising like lakes like Winnie or Leech. I mean, they'll pop right up on top, but you need to be close to that, adjacent deep water. Water.
Yep. And this, as the spawn progresses, March like that, they seem like they can get really shallow up on top of that stuff.
I've caught them in, 6, 7, 8 feet of water. I know when I was on Cass Lake one day, we're trying to target perch and catching burbot in like 6, 7 feet of water. It was pretty incredible. And then I know Leech Lake, coming out of Walker Bay, same thing. We were up on this flat and we were kind of pushing near the edge trying to find perch because most of those perch are up on those flats. And lo and behold, started catching burbot in like 8 feet of water. Pretty awesome. And in that clear water to see them come up, especially during the day, is pretty amazing. But yeah, towards evening, I like the sharper breaks. I like to use bigger profile baits, these really big pronounced glow jigs. They have all sorts of different baits out there. I think I can call them in with a big bait, like I've used like a rip and wrap, like a glow colored rip and wrap, or even like just kind of a giant glow spoon, the biggest, rattle spoon I can find, or I get real gaudy with my burbot presentations. I'll hang a couple different minnows off the trebles, and I like to use, really kind of stinky bait. Like I think shiners have a lot more scent than fatheads, and so I'll even use shiners. Oh, Nick's got one coming up. Don't screw this one up. That's a nice fish. That's a nice fish. Can you hear the drag? Oh yeah.
I don't think this one's a perch.
There's only been 2 live, well, let's call them on location Dialed In Angling podcast episodes. And both of them I was fishing with Nick. So this goes to tell you how we roll as far as recording a podcast. That's a nice fish. We're not, that's not a perch.
That's not a perch. Little tungsten with a couple larvae. We'll see what we got.
You know what? That's not a bad walleye bait. As you get into February and even March, a lot of the walleyes that are out here, they're feeding on the same thing that the perch are feeding on. And that's bloodworms, that's mayfly nymphs, that's fish fly larvae, invertebrates.
What do we got?
Is it shaking like a pout?
Wouldn't that be something?
It's got to be a walleye.
Oh, it's a smallmouth bass.
No way. Get out of town.
You know what? I am cotton.
Whoa!
This is my
I'm taking a picture. Okay, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to take a picture of this fish so you can see this on the podcast. So I catch smallmouth out here, okay, but they're usually a little closer to the rock than what we're fishing today. Here, will you come over here? I'm going to take a picture of that. But they're usually really close to the rock, okay? And when you see them this time of year, they're usually a lot more dormant than that. They don't come up and fire and hit baits. They do want really small tungsten baits, but they're usually just not interested. But once you get into March, these big schools of wintering bass, they just come alive. They turn into smallmouth bass. Dude, that thing is a beast. That's got to be a 20-inch smallmouth, man. Okay, so I took a picture for our listeners. We're going to put that as our picture online. We'll take a couple perch pics today, and we'll put that bass on. That's the first smallmouth that I've had come through the ice this year.
That's it might be my first or second through the ice ever on Mille Lacs, for me personally.
So when you go to Canada and you go to Schwamigan Bay, there's a lot of places where you can catch them like crazy, right? They bite in the winter. Out here, there are spots where you can catch them at certain times of year. Like early ice, I can catch them pretty regularly. As you get into March, they bite pretty regularly. But most of the time, they just kind of stay in their little area. I have these wintering areas where I know they're at. If you drop an underwater camera down, they come right in and look at it. They love the underwater cameras, just like the summer. If you've ever dropped a Markham camera down in the summer, bass come right up to it and look at it. They love it. They're like intrigued by it. In the winter, they do the same thing. But a lot of days they don't bite, and you usually have to be kind of right on that rock. We're off the rock. We're out in the basin. We're trolling off a gravel bar. There are certain areas where you don't want to target smallmouth bass in the winter because they're just prone to barrel trauma. I have one spot in particular. It's pretty deep. It's like 33, 34 feet, and there's some rock, and there's bass out there very regularly, but you don't want to target them. They're susceptible to barrel trauma just like any other fish. So I just don't even go out there. What's interesting, since let's say the BASS, fishing contest that we're out here, the Angler of the Year contest, And during those contests, well, the first one in particular, these bass were already moving out to their wintering areas. It's kind of a colder September that year, and the fish had, for whatever reason, slid out deeper. These wintering areas really got exposed, and they've changed. You know, some of the areas where I could find smallmouth bass every single year in those locations, they're not there anymore because those great big boulders that anglers are targeting in the fall disrupt those wintering spots, and those fish actually move off them. So it's interesting that you caught a lone 20-inch smallmouth out here a long ways from the rock. I think some of these fish have just adapted and they basin out in a little bit softer bottom. Just my opinion. I'm not sure, but I know some of these wintering areas that used to be filled with hundreds and hundreds of smallmouth no longer have that many bass there because there's so many people targeting them in the fall now.
That's really interesting because it's one of when we're fishing in the summertime. And the wintertime, a lot of times, you know, clients ask us, what the heck, where do these bass go in the winter? Why don't we catch them? And it was funny. We were just talking about it today, actually. We were talking about the growth rate of the perch out here and how they're growing so fast because there's just so much forage in the lake. And, but that's kind of the opposite with bass in Minnesota, isn't it? And you were telling me it has a lot to do with how they go dormant in the wintertime. They're not eating as much and the growth rates are a lot shorter than, you know, down south, you know, Tennessee River or something like that.
So if you think of species like perch, right, they're active all winter. They're feeding all winter. Right now, they're really getting active because they're starting to develop eggs, especially the females. But perch will feed all winter. Crappies, for the most part, feed all winter. So they're feeding year round. Whereas bass, let's say largemouth, smallmouth, even bluegills for that matter, their metabolism slow way down. So their growth rate slows way down compared to other areas where the water's warmer. You look at down south and you compare down south, let's say largemouth, down south, different strains. And I realize there's different biological strains than what we have. However, their bass grow quicker. Just like you put a largemouth bass in an aquarium, for example, let's say you have a giant aquarium at home, that bass grows really fast. Whereas here, you know, they don't grow in the winter because they're not feeding as much, you know, so their growth rate in the winter is just kind of stymied because of the cold temps and their metabolism. Whereas perch, you know, they grow super fast in Mille Lacs. I will say out here when I do catch smallmouth and when they do actually turn on, they almost always want like a small tungsten like you had on there. And so
I tell you what, that one had a big belly on it for not feeding much in the winter.
Yeah, they're fat. They're fat. And a lot of them do have eggs, you know, but, they're fat out here. You know, they sat all fall and just gorged themselves on crayfish, on bait. Mille Lacs Lake is overall just a healthy fishery right now. We're seeing great bait numbers. We're seeing good perch numbers, good walleye numbers, good young of the year walleye numbers, smallmouth numbers. Of course, burbot we were just talking about. I think the lake's really had a great comeback this year. Let's step away from Mille Lacs talk a little bit and just talk about different fishing situations that anglers can do over the next few weeks. I know a lot of people are really looking forward to just getting out walleye fishing a couple more times before the end of the season. If I were going to go walleye fishing right now, there's a couple locations I would go. Mille Lacs is not one of them if you want to capitalize on the walleyes. Certainly the perch are biting out here, but if I'm going to go walleye fishing right now it seems like South Dakota, they still have a really good walleye bite going. Devil's Lake has been fantastic all year as far as walleyes. The perch bite's been kind of hit or miss from what I hear, but the walleye fishing's been really good. And then Lake of the Woods. I continue to hear Lake of the Woods, both on the Canadian and the American side, to be really good. I mean, I know I've left here many times and gone up to like the Northwest Angle or up to the Canadian side of Lake of the Woods, and you get on any hump and you just start wailing on them. Yeah,
no, for sure. That Lake of the Woods would probably be really high on my list as well. It seems like it just produces fish all year round, and they have an extended season up there too. So anglers can take advantage of that when when it closes here, they can head up to the border there.
True. You know, inland walleyes close in 2 weeks. there's not too many small lakes that I can think of that are really good, powerful bite. It always seems like it kind of peters out to me. But there are a few areas. I want to say Winnie would be a good inland lake where you could catch them. Red Lake's always a good lake, probably better night bite right now than a day bite. But with the crappies going, that's always a good destination for people. And then, of course, Lake of the Woods, the south end of Lake of the Woods. But this year, all around the ice belt, it seems like you can get anywhere. Like with wheelhouses, again, make sure that you have the extensions, but you can absolutely go anywhere. And so, there's a lot of destinations outside of Minnesota that I really want to bring my wheelhouse. And some of those locations, I had mentioned earlier, whether it be Devil's Lake or the Wabae area, places like that where you could bring a wheelhouse and have a lot of success fishing, and getting multi-species. This year, or I should say this time of year, it's pretty difficult to go out and just say, I'm only going to catch walleyes, because it's not going to be the greatest bite in the world. However, if you go to a destination like Wabae, South Dakota, Devil's Lake, North Dakota, Lake of the Woods, for example, you might not have a night bite at Lake of the Woods, but you might get into burbot, right? I know people that have really good success catching burbot at night up there, and then a really good walleye fishing all day long.
Yep. Yeah. And the, perch, crappie, they got it all up there.
A lot of big perch. And, the crappies are sort of sneaky. I've been hearing that South Basin more and more, where people stumble into big schools of giant crappies out there.
Yeah. Lake of the Woods can grow everything big. It's just such a vast fishery with so much bait and forage for these fish. It seems like it has everything, and they're all big up there, every species.
Oh, 100%, 100%. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about opportunities coming up for the future. Maybe even talk about a few new Rapala baits that we've been testing. And then, of course, don't forget your auger extensions once again if you're heading up to the lake. We'll be right back with more Dialed In Angling podcast. onX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Download the app today to get fisheries information in the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, along with research tools for serious anglers and beginners alike. Filter lakes by species, trophy only, keeper fish, abundance, or all of the above. Plan which lakes to fish with the app, navigate to the accesses, and once you're there, use the onX best-in-class weather imagery and fishing hotspots to catch more fish. onX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you would never known existed. onX Fish, the app that is changing the game on ice. Welcome back to the Dialed In Angling podcast. Nick's hooked up again. What do we got, Nick?
Jumbo perch.
There we go. Oh, that's a nice one. See, now that's a quality perch anywhere. It'll just spit up a ton of bugs. That's what they're keying in on. If you're coming to Mille Lake, make sure that you've got a couple things with you. One, we said it 3 times already, auger extension. We just about didn't get through in the wheelhouse, and I've been out here every day. I knew it was getting close, but I mean, we're making ice daily with these temperatures. Even with this much snow and ice on the lake, we probably gained 2 inches of ice since Tuesday. I was up north fishing around Winnie the last few days. So, but yeah, we're getting really down to the wire. I mean, you can't get any tighter than what we got today without an extension and still got through with the Strike Master.
I'm interested to see how long the season's going to stretch out this year with these cold temps we've been having, and how much, it still looks like next week we're going to be making more ice, but it's going to be a long season, I think.
It is. I think there's going to be ice fishing opportunities well into March, not just in Minnesota, but all over the ice belt. Maybe even in April, late April, May. I hope
Don't
not.
say not May.
I hope not. I like being on the boat by then. I know Nick does as well. Nick's preoccupied trying to drop on these perch right now, so he's not focusing on the podcast. I love late ice fishing. I always think of late ice fishing starting in March, but it's so many times that we get cold fronts in February and even the first part of March where it's not really until March 15th that things turn around. Look at the school you have down there. That is a mega school.
It's like Christmas tree, that's for sure.
But in addition to the auger extensions, if you're coming to Mille Lacs, you're going to want to bring small tungsten, right, with larvae, waxworms. I like using, just really small tungsten, whether it's white, red, gold, pink. Those are kind of my go-tos. And then, of course, spoons. The rattle and roach spoon's been hot all year out here. The bull spoon has been great. Even little rippin' wraps. They're starting to feed on little young of the year perch as well. So having some of those horizontal baits like a jigging wrap, a rippin' wrap, a slab wrap, if nothing else, those baits will draw them in and then they'll hit the small tungsten like you've got on right now.
Yeah, I hadn't taken off the roach spoon yet with that white marabou. Just seemed to be money all year. But today I actually downsized to a tungsten and it seems to be kind of the ticket today.
Yeah, my son Robbie was out here with a friend of his, and they fished all day. And actually, it was my daughter's boyfriend. He was out with my son, and he was just wailing on a tungsten. And Robbie had the spoon on, and instantly Robbie switched, and he's like, it was night and day. And they ended up with a bucket full of fish. I was out filming. I was out in Hayward filming, so Robbie was asking me, he's like, yeah, can we, head over to Mille Lacs and, of course, get over there and enjoy the perch fishing. Let's leave the Mille Lacs talk again. We'll shelf that a little bit later. I know we're probably going to be interrupted by perch here. That's just the nature of the beast as we're doing the podcast on location here. But I want to deep dive a little bit more into, some of the other fishing opportunities that still exist as we get later in the season. We talked about burbot fishing, but I want to talk more about pan fishing because a lot of people think of winter pan fishing this time of year as only fishing out in the basin. That's not the case. I was just on a lake yesterday, found a ton of panfish in 15 to 16 feet of water. Oh, Nick's hooked up again. Not as big a perch. That's good to see, though, these smaller year class of perch. If we only had big ones that we were catching, that would say that there's going to be one year class and that's it. There are a ton of perch like you just caught right there in that 6-inch range. So those perch are going to grow fast. Next year, you're going to see a lot of 9s and 10s out of those fish. They grow extremely fast out here. But, okay, so crappie fishing yesterday, 16 feet of water. There are some lakes where you still have good weeds because we didn't have much snow up until the last few weeks. So I was in searching for fish in the cabbage, and I was amazed how many crappies and bluegills were up in that cabbage. Yeah. Largemouth bass. I think me personally, I don't start fishing real shallow for panfish until later in the season. But since we still have a lot of green weeds in a lot of locations, I think even though it's 20 below in the mornings, you're still finding these fish that are utilizing those cabbage areas.
Yep. And yes, that's another progression that happens. Those fish come out of the basin, they start moving towards the shorelines more and more and more as the season progresses into March and that time. Is when eyes typically look shallow, but I'm sure, just like anything, there's fish that don't ever leave that cabbage. Is if we don't have much snow and that weeds don't really die off, it's holding bait fish, it's giving the fish protection. They just love weeds.
I think one of my favorite things to do in the winter, aside from fishing, I love hunting for fish. So just hunting them down using forward facing sonar, figuring them out. That's always been the thing that I like doing the most, right? Well, in the winter, I love just walking around with an underwater camera, have someone drill in holes and then dropping it in weed beds and finding these massive schools of panfish that are up in the weeds. And I've always said that I think the bigger panfish live in the weeds. Yep. If you go out into a basin, you may catch numbers of crappies, but you don't catch the big ones.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the underwater camera, when it comes to weeds, is irreplaceable.
But I've also always thought, well, when the ice gets thick, you start needing extensions. There's no way that these fish remain deep or remain shallow. And that's not always the case. My thinking has changed a lot. I know last winter with it not having a lot of ice, right? And having all that rain, remember all the rain we had in January? I was catching walleyes in like 4 or 5 feet of water all season long. And I thought, wow, it's just because of all the oxygen and these fish are up here. No, I think some of these locations, those fish are up there all season long. I don't think that it was just a 1-year phenomenon. Certainly they were biting better because oxygen levels were high. But I think that fish remain shallow in a lot more locations than we think.
Yep, absolutely. And like you touched on, the bigger fish, especially.
Well, and you talk to anglers out in the Dakotas, for example, like North Dakota, they fish shallow all year. I know Lake Winnipeg. I remember going up and drilling a hole, and there was more ice than there was water beneath us, especially in the mornings. And we were catching giant walleyes in that shallow water. So that those peak feeding periods, those giants were way up in there.
No, for sure. And that, I think a lot of people, another reason that they don't target that shallow weeds is it's a lot harder to find them. It can be, and to see know exactly what you're seeing on your sonars and stuff like that. I mean, you see a bunch of weeds and it can be harder to find fish, but it is extremely rewarding when you do land on them.
Well, and I think prior to forward facing sonar, those fish got spooked a lot more. So people weren't seeing them. So they just assumed they weren't there. Yeah. Now we're seeing them. So we can get to setting up like we talked about earlier, where you set up, you turn down the lights, you get into those situations, and you really just you can see the fish coming, so that here you go, boys, they're there. Whereas prior to forward facing sonar, you bumped them or made a lot of racket, and you just assume the fish were not there. I think there, in addition to the walleyes closing down inland, there's a lot of pike still roaming. I've been seeing a lot of pictures of pike being caught a lot of places, Mille Lacs being one of them. It seems like there's a lot of big pike being posted. Lake of the Woods are seeing some pike being posted. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the pike season actually doesn't close on Mille Lacs until I think April 1st. It goes well into March. Don't quote me on that, but the pike season definitely goes beyond the walleye closer on Mille Lacs, and I think some other locations as well. Lake of the Woods, they have that late pike season. That's always super cool. So there's those opportunities. And then of course, like we've been talking about panfish. I mean, when it's 20 below out, right, in the morning, would you rather chase perch and panfish or beat your head against the wall and try to catch some walleyes?
Yeah, no kidding. And another species that kind of gets underlooked, but when I was young, I used to love doing it just because the action was so fast and furious, is tulipy fishing.
Oh, for sure.
There's a lot of great destinations to go tulipy fishing and go out and catch 100 a day. It's a riot.
Yeah, we've caught quite a few here today. We've seen a lot come through. We've seen schools of them. I've had so many days as a guide where I remember, we used to run snow bears, and I'd bounce around on spots and looking for perch and walleyes, and you'd get into schools of tulipes, and it'd be hundreds and hundreds of them. And it was hard to get customers to move. Like, okay, guys, you need to reel up. We need to move. They were having so much fun catching those things. And they can move shallow too. I know, like on Winnebagosh, I've had areas where I'm way up on a flat and all of a sudden tulipes roam through. And I always think of tulipes as a deep water fish, but no, they're aggressive. They're going to take opportunities to feed on bugs and get shallow as well. If the water's cold, they're kind of all over the place. I know, we're talking about fishing in that 6-7 feet, looking for perch and walleyes up there. Well, I can think of so many times in March when the perch or the tulipes are up there feeding with the perch in that extremely shallow water. And yeah, really, really fun to catch. If you ever watch them on an underwater camera, they're almost like little lake trout, how they feed in circles, where they'll come around and try to slap baits with their tails and zip around. I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago that it's been a few years since I've been out to Green Bay fishing, but they do the whitefish. Super fun. That was a blast. And that water is really, really clear. In the Great Lakes, when you're fishing, there's a lot of current. So a lot of times if you're using a 2D sonar, it's hard to see your baits. So we were putting underwater cameras down to see those whitefish come through, and they're incredible how they feed, and in Green Bay, they use kind of a dropper rig where it's like a spoon up high, and then they have kind of a dropper on there with some small larvae, but it's a big dropper, but they still have the hooks on let's say on the spoon, for example. So either the whitefish come up and they hit the spoon or they hit the dropper. And I mean, when you see they get limits and limits of fish out there. I fished out there with JJ Milovitz, quite a few years back. And man, it was cool to see just how they come through. And when we had the cameras down, we saw walleyes. We saw all sorts of different species out in Green Bay.
Yeah, and when I'm around here in Minnesota targeting those tulipies, I'm using something similar to that as well, just a little, or any kind of spoon. You can just tie a chunk of fishing line onto the end of it, maybe
with a dropper,
a 12-inch dropper.
Yeah, and, sure. The only difference is like out there you had two hooks, right? In Minnesota, you can only use one hook. You can't have the two hook system. You
right.
know what
I mean? I would take the hook off the bottom one and just tie the line
like a
to
flasher.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Yep. Just that was just to get their attention, and then on the bottom, just a small little tungsten jig with a couple wax worms or something. But
well, lastly, I do want to touch on a few bites that are kind of on the fringe of the ice belt. But seeing that we're having these polar vortexes, we had a major one in January. We're having more of a normal winter than we had last year. I think a lot of people think that we're having a cold winter, but I think it's just a normal winter, to be honest with you. I think we just got so spoiled last year, and it was just such a phenomenon, just a weird deal that we had, the weather that we had last winter. And so to have a normal winter, or what I would consider normal, even though people are saying it's colder, has basically blossomed a lot of different fishing opportunities outside the ice belt. I don't know about you, but like I get on a lot of different Facebook groups, groups that are out in Lake Erie, some Iowa fishing groups, Nebraska, for example, Kansas, lots of areas out southern Illinois, where they're experiencing great ice conditions. For me, I think a bucket list ice fishing would be Lake Erie. I've always wanted to experience Lake Erie through the ice. I know it's really, really risky at times, but when you get a good ice year like this, if you can get out there on a day like today, even though it's cold with no wind, they walk out and they catch giant walleyes. They take snowmobiles out and they catch giant walleyes. The biggest factor, though, as far as, the risk factor, if you will, if that ice chunk breaks off, your stuff has to get left out there and you're getting rescued by helicopter. And because of like maritime law, you have to leave your stuff out there, and people can just pirate your stuff. Like if you have a jet boat or an airboat, for example, you could go up and pick up all that stuff that got left out there and it's yours. And then people have to buy their stuff back from other folks. Isn't that wild?
I've never heard of anything like that. That's crazy.
It is crazy. But I think that's what keeps people from bringing out, snowmobiles and four-wheelers to Lake Erie. That would be the scary part. But how do you get out to the good fishing without a snowmobile? I think if I went out there for sure, I'd bring a sled. Secondly, I would make sure that thing's capped off. And if there's any wind at all, I'm not going.
No, I definitely would have to be safe conditions, of course.
But I've always wanted to fish it because the last time it was fishable was like 2014 or something like that. So we're talking 11 years ago. And the walleyes they catch are phenomenal. I mean, you think the Lake Winnipeg fish are big. Lake Erie, I mean, they're getting 9-10 pounders super consistently. I've seen pictures on some of these Facebook groups where, they have 30 walleyes spread out and half of them are 8 pounders, and that's just one day of one guy walking out, catching them, just dragging an otter sled behind him. Can you imagine if you could get out on good ice with a snowmobile?
Yeah, no, that would be fun. That's something I really haven't, heard much about or have any experience with myself, but it sounds like something I need to look into.
There's a lot of Great Lake fishing that I want to experience. Bay to Knock, Little Bay to Knock, Northern Michigan, Green Bay. Green Bay is so fun, and Green Bay locks up pretty consistently almost most years. I think this year there's going to be an opportunity to fish Green Bay in March when all those big females come in. That's going to be another late ice opportunity. Lake of the Woods that we already talked about. I think a lot of people, once the kind of the inland waters, or inland Minnesota ice fishing season closes, there's not a lot of people that hang on, well into March. Things people start to move on. They go on vacation, spring break. They're boat shopping. They're ready for spring crappie fishing or the Rainy River. But that late ice March fishing, we haven't experienced for a couple of years because we've had really warm Marches the last few years. But as you get into, let's say, after St. Patty's Day, that can be some of the best fishing of the year.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you see in the fall. The boats are all off the lake after the temps start dropping, the docks are coming out, and that's the best fishing of the year. Well, that same thing happens kind of in the ice season. So it's an awesome time to get on the water, and you will have some of the best bites of the year, no doubt.
I think as I get into late March, it's got to be really nice for me to get out fishing, like especially into April, like April ice fishing for me. I like it when it's super warm. If it's nasty cold, like we had, 10 years ago, I remember fishing in April and it was nasty. It wasn't until the end of April that it actually got nice where you could hole hop. But I think it's some of my favorite time of year to fish, but I'm ready for spring as well. And so I love getting out in the boat as quick as possible. But I think this year we're going to have an ice season well into March. So I think that wraps it up for us. Nick is so preoccupied with this perch that's coming in that he's not paying attention to the podcast. No, I'm kidding. Good luck to everybody. I know it's cold out there, but a couple bites that you want to key in on. Obviously, Mille Lacs perch fishing is right there. Lake of the Woods, Devil's Lake, North Dakota, the Wabae area. I think those in particular bites are kind of the hottest bites right now. So that and pan fishing, if you want to get kids out on the ice, over the next few weeks. I know we got President's Day weekend coming up. We've got some other things on the calendar. Pan fishing is always a great way to get kids involved with fishing, getting them out there. Perch fishing like we're doing today. You can hear the drags going off. It's pretty hard to beat. So until next time, I'm Tony Roach, Nick Cekalla. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to Dialed In Angling. We'll talk to you next week.